for coming, our dear speakers. So let me introduce the speakers of today's panel. Agnieszka Markiewicz, the director of AJC, American Jewish Committee in Poland and Eastern Europe, right? Mr. Matthew Bronsman, the chair of International Steering Committee of Limmud FSU. Her Excellency, Ambassador of Israel to Poland, Anna Azari, and Chief Rabbi of Poland, Michael Shudrich. And the moderator of today's panel will be the journalist of Times of Israel, who came all the way from Budapest to be with us, Yaakov Schwartz, please.
Thank you. All right. Welcome, thank you, everybody. We're here to discuss Jewish, Polish, and Israeli relations in light of the recent Holocaust legislation. And I guess we'll try to keep our maybe 3 minutes a person per answer so we don't have a repeat of yesterday, which, okay. The first question that I have is, how do we negotiate the difficult line between recognizing Polish victimization during World War II and the Nazi occupation with occasions of complicity or even collaboration with the Nazis when it came to the Jews? So anybody who would like to?
In the Sanhedrin, we always started with the youngest person first. So I'm not sure if it's Agnieszka or Matthew,
Rabbi,
but I think it may be Agnieszka.
Rabbi, you're just always overwhelmingly kind.
Well, first of all, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much. Well, first of all, actually, thank you very much for being in Poland. I think we can discuss the subject a bit further, a bit more, a bit later. But I want to say that from the perspective of the Polish Jewish community, of the Jewish community in Poland, it is very important that groups like yours come to Poland, see Poland as a country, engage in dialogue on Polish Jewish issues, and of course interact with the Jewish community here in Poland. So regarding of the particular moment in time in which your visit falls, which undoubtedly is a very difficult moment for both for Polish-Israeli relations, but also for Polish-Jewish relations. I think it is very important that people come to Poland, learn about Polish history, learn about history of Polish-Jewish relations, and learn about the life of the Jewish community here. Thank you very much for having me. It's a great pleasure. As Roman kindly introduced me, I have the pleasure of leading the Office of American Jewish Committee here. It's called AJC Central Europe. It covers 4 Visegrad countries and 3 Baltic states. I have been engaged in Polish-Jewish dialogue all of my professional life, not to mention my personal life. The story of my family, I guess, is a story of Polish-Jewish relations and Polish-Jewish dialogue and the struggles of it. As such, but therefore this subject is very important for me and very personal. As I understand your question, how to come to terms and how should we even talk about the Polish victimhood versus Polish complicity in the Holocaust. It's a very, very complicated subject and that requires for sure more than a 3-minute answer. Although actually I think that Rabbi Shudrich might be able to do it, so I'm looking forward to hearing what you'll say. I'm sure you know by now and in general you know a lot about Polish history. You know the basics of it, being it that Poland had the largest Jewish population in Europe at the break of the war, around 3.5 million people. Warsaw was 1/3 Jewish, for instance. You know that September 1st, 1939, Poland was invaded by Nazi Germany, and then September 17th, from the other side, Poland was invaded by the Soviet Union, and for the period of war, sort of ceased to exist. There was no government in Poland. There was no government that would collaborate with the Germans. And as you mentioned in your question, Poland and Polish people suffered immensely during the occupation. 6 million people died in Poland during the war, 3 million Polish Jews, and 3 million non-Jewish Poles. And why those numbers are important? Those numbers are important because these 3 million Polish Jews were over 90% of the population of Jews in Poland. It meant that all families died, and perhaps in some families somebody survived. For Polish families, those 3 millions also meant that Polish families and Polish people went through a horror, and it meant that probably, I'm here, it's not a statistic number, but most likely every family lost a member, and some families more than one. We talk often about the Olympics of suffering, the competition in victimhood, which I think on the one hand is understandable because we're talking about two nations which suffered immensely. At the same time, it's a very difficult starting point to have a valuable dialogue and valuable conversation. Because what is indispensable for such a dialogue is a certain openness and receptiveness to the story of the other. And when we are only focusing on our own suffering, it's very difficult to hear the arguments of the other side. Now, talking about where the Polish complicity falls into the image of victimhood, of course, it's very hard to give a simple and short answer. And I think that's what makes for Polish people the subject so complicated. That yes, Poland is a victim. No, Poland is not responsible for Holocaust. Yes, some Poles, probably more than today's Poland wants to admit, committed crimes against Jews this way or another. And it's a very difficult psychological situation in which at the same time you're a victim, you're a witness, and you're a perpetrator in some cases. What makes this whole situation even more complicated is, of course, the post-war history of Poland, which in this room, I'm sure I don't need to explain much about what it meant to be part of a Soviet-controlled part of Europe and how it influenced the discourse on history. But I just wanted to flag that it's important to remember about this issue, that there was no open discussion in Poland on Polish-Jewish relations, on Polish-Jewish history. And there was a temptation, and it was not just a temptation. The Holocaust was somehow not even present in the prevailing teaching of history. The story that was being told was the history of communism winning over fascism. And when you went to the Auschwitz Museum and you had a list of victims, they were in an alphabetical order of their nationality by countries from which they were coming. And Jews, the word in Polish is Żydzi, which is the last letter of the Polish alphabet, happened to be last on this list.
I'm sorry if.
Yes, and I'm done.
Yes, Matthew, would you like to answer? Or you can pass if you like.
I think I'll pass.
Okay.
I want to add only one thing to this issue. Definitely Agnieszka is the best on discussing this complicating matter. The interesting part for me is that almost all our knowledge about crimes against Jews during the Holocaust committed by Poles is a knowledge gained by Polish historians. It's not something which we know from the outside. And of those historians, okay, we will have two Jews, one very knowledgeable and an American by now, Jan Tomasz Gross. The second one is Grabowski, but the rest of the very, very important people who are researching what happened to the Jews in Poland during the war, and mostly researching the issues of Jews who didn't get to the camps, the Jews who were trying to save themselves, to run away from ghettos, and who were approaching non-Jews for help, are Poles. We have to appreciate them, we have to help them, and we have to admire them. Having added to this subject a bit, I just want to say hello to all of you. I don't know whether it's Chaim's job, but for me, Limmud, I appreciate Limmud FSU very much. I appreciate it very much since the times I was ambassador in Russia. I think it's a wonderful, wonderful framework for living a kind of, I don't know, Jewish or Jewish educational process. Chaim, you missed all the compliments. And I'm very happy that this organization is working. I think it's smart, it's young. I love the fact that in the FSU events, usually the youngsters bring the parents and not the other way around. So I'm very happy to see you again, even if it's a not very typical place of meeting. It's a bit, the only problem I have is that speaking to FSU people, not in Russian, is strange, but
You can.
but I can.
I'd just like to point out that speaking like this does not count as part of the time limit to your question, so please feel free to, everybody, to speak as long, about Limmud as you want to. Go ahead, take your time. There's no limit with that. No. Okay.
Wonderful information. The ambassador opened our conference in Ukraine when she was ambassador of Israel in Ukraine. Then beforehand, she opened our conference in Moscow when she was ambassador in Russia. And now she opened our conference in Poland. So Anna Azar is with us on the way. So tell us where you go next so we can prepare our next event.
Roy Sodrich, would you like?
Sure. I think it's a very simple answer, how to deal with such a complicated subject. I think yesterday I would have had a harder time. Today I have an easier time, and that is simply read what President Rivlin said yesterday at March of the Living. One of the most eloquent, and by the way, don't tell him this, I'm not always a big fan. So I shouldn't say that, but so I disagree with other things, but I'm in awe of whoever wrote that speech. And I'd like just to quote here where Rivlin said, "Your Excellency, President of Poland, the Polish nation barely survived the Second World War. In September 1939, Poland had become the greatest field of death, murder, and destruction in Europe. It was an area under Nazi occupation, and the Poles were an oppressed people living in fear." And he went on. In other words, when engaging in dialogue, very important is to first recognize and be sensitive to the pain of the other. Once, it would be much nicer if we could start by feeling the joy of the other, but often the first step in dialogue is feeling the pain of the other. And I think that, and the fact that I won't quote it now, but then President Rivlin went on and said, yeah, but the law is really bad. And we have to change, we have to do something about it. And I can't remember because there was both a press conference, which was earlier, and then there was also the two presidents' speeches. So I don't remember exactly which one he said it. And we need then to educate together. I think it was in Birkenau he said that, right, at the speech. So that's it. You feel the other side's pain, and whatever you want to do, whatever the solution is, we're doing it together. So I have to say, and it really, I've heard a lot of things, a lot of speeches in my life, way too many. It was one of the most wise and balanced speeches I've ever heard. And it's, again, coming from someone who's not always a fan. So, what? Yeah? Kol hakavod. And now the second thing that's very important in this entire discussion is, I just wanted to ask, if I may, what is the Holocaust legislation? Because there is no law that was passed here about the Holocaust. Part of the problem is that someone very cleverly named it the Holocaust legislation. It doesn't talk about the Holocaust. It impacts on the Holocaust and other things. And therefore, the language within which a difficult point is discussed is also very important.
And this actually touches on my next question, which was...
I didn't talk about Limmud yet.
Please, actually, go ahead. No,
I'm serious.
okay.
I knew you were going to cut me off, so I figured to leave the Limmud part for the end. I've been involved with Limmud Poland since the beginning, and really what you guys have done in the FSU is amazing and is an inspiration for us here. We've had the largest Limmuds, we've had up to 800, 900 people here. And because you've been doing it longer, Jesse, you should know that your Limmud is an inspiration and a model for us. That's what you get with a rabbi who's been rabbi for 30 years, can compliment in 30 seconds.
And I did want to speak about the language of the legislation, which, is vague. Even I will admit, I don't think I know every detail of what's going on in there.
One understands it.
Right. So what is it? And is it enforceable, the law, and what does it actually say?
Before we get to that, if I may. Aaron, before you leave. First of all, Aaron is my partner in crime at Limmud. He's president of Limmud FSU. And I just want to say thank you, Aaron, for everything you do for us, for the hotel, which is a specific thing, but in general for everything. And we couldn't do it without you. And Chaim and Sandy, of course, and Roman. And for those of you on the panel who don't know, this is our Global Leadership Summit. We have people here from every country, I think, where we operate. And it's really inspirational to have everybody here to learn from each other and the things we do well and the things we don't do well, to make sure we continue to do it better. So we appreciate all the compliments, but we view that we are, as Limmud FSU, sort of passing our infant stage and just getting to be sort of teenagers. We're 12 years old, and we have a lot of work to do. I'm very excited to continue to do the work. I spent a lot of time in Israel, and I would say that a lot of the people I hang around with have a view of the Israeli president, which is he's sort of and please don't quote me, this is an internal thing, but he's like a nice, he's like Saba. He's like, everybody's grandfather. He's a nice, jolly guy. I was also blown away by his speech yesterday. And I turned to Aaron as we were sitting before we had the huge honor of lighting a torch yesterday. And I articulated, not quite as well as you did, Rabbi, but that I thought that was a brilliant, nuanced speech on a very, very sensitive issue. And he addressed, I think, the critical part of, as you said, feeling the pain of others first, gathering some empathy and articulating empathy, and at the same time saying, but there was responsibility, and we can't walk away from it. My issue with the law is not the specifics, and certainly I don't know the details of the legislation, but my fear is that it's part of something larger. It's part of a creeping eradication of what happened. That I don't think it's an isolated moment, and I fear that you've seen across Europe a wave of nationalism, of the right growing in its popularity, and you see it at the polls. And so my fear is that if we don't respond and we don't call out what in fact are the facts, again, with empathy, as you said, there was no Polish government to collaborate necessarily with the Nazis, But the Polish citizens, and again, the president articulated how many righteous Gentiles there were and were honored at Yad Vashem. But there were others who actually didn't behave so well. And I don't know how we would have all behaved given the pressures, the fears. But the fact is, there were many collaborators. And my fear is that this is part of a growing sort of Poland first kind of attitude that could allow anti-Semitism to creep up again.
Well, I think except you, Matthew, everybody, panelist here is dealing with this law for the last, we are counting already days and weeks. My service here in Poland divided itself into two parts, 3.5 incredible years where we're doing everything more or less we wanted or invented, and 2.5 months of dealing with this law. I don't think it's very important to go into the language of the law. I would limit myself to a couple of remarks. One, you can believe it or not, but this law was not created in the minds of the creators in order to do something vis-a-vis the Jewish communities, the Jewish life, and so on. The whole eruption from their perspective, eruption in Israel and in the Jewish world was unexpected. I don't want to go into the details of what in the Polish structure prevented them to listen to the warnings they were given, but it happened. They were expecting a crisis with Ukraine. They didn't expect a crisis with the Jews. Secondly, we spent quite some time with different kinds of lawyers during this very interesting crisis. Some of them, at the very beginning, said that this law wasn't applicable seriously to either testimonies and so on. It's very hard to apply the law as it is. Secondly, we are not in the square one slot right now, because the Ministry of Justice, which serves also as Attorney General, already published their reading of the law. It's 64 pages long, not even written in Polish. It was written in Polish legalese, and we lost a couple of days of our life to try to understand what's written. But we are not at square one now, and everything is more or less frozen until we'll understand what happens with the decision of the Constitutional Tribunal in Poland. But what we should think about when we think about this issue is that there are two different subjects. One subject is the law, which I think and I hope, maybe I'm too optimistic, but it's going to be solved. I hope so, touch wood. But the other thing which we can't unknow is the wave of anti-Semitism which accompanied this eruption. Now, all of us here knew the percentages of anti-Semitism in Poland, which are, by the way, not the worst in Europe. If you want to know, as far as I remember, the worst country in Europe on the numbers of anti-Semitism, surprisingly, is Greece, which is very interesting. But what happened during this law event was, all the genies went out of the bottle. And things which were not imaginable, expressions which were not imaginable, started to be used not only in public not only in the hate mail which was sent to, I think, all of us,
You got the most.
By the way, yesterday was an incredible personal success for me, who is in the foreign ministry for 35 years. I got myself into a satirical program. I have an actor playing me.
It's the Polish Saturday Night Live.
So I didn't see it yet, but it's fun. I hope it's fun. In any case, there were words. In my embassy, we have young people working who were not understood when I came to ask young people, do they know what parch means? All of the Russian speakers here know it because it's from parchate, okay? Parchate. So I understood the word better than the Poles here because it wasn't used for 60 years and it was used on TV, not on our hate mail only.
It was used. It was.
I don't. They didn't know the etymology of the word, and I knew it because of my Russian, not because of Polish. It wasn't used on TV. No. And this issue is much harder to solve. I want to balance us personally. I became a known face here because of this crisis. And I have to tell you the other part of the story. People are coming up on the street, at events, apologizing for what happened. It's not, don't ever fall into these definitions. Poles are anti-Semitic. There are no anti-Semitic nations. There are no, it's as racist as saying Jews are whatever. It's not